everyone here a little bit about your background, your history, Zayo, kind of your mission and what you're engaged in right now. It's a pretty big undertaking.
Yeah, thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. So I'm between lunch and the FCC chairman. I'm surprised anyone came back in. Chip gave a great, I thought, commercial for Zayo in the last panel. We're the largest independent builder and operator of fiber optic networks in the U.S., B2B. We're not fiber to the home, although we do a significant amount of backhaul for fiber to the home providers. We've been at it about 18 years, went private almost 5 years ago, and our focus really is on large and growing bandwidth providers. So our largest customers are those who are making up the AI ecosystem, whether it's the hyperscalers or the data center companies or the chip manufacturers or those who are involved with the reindustrialization of the U.S. and North America.
How is AI and the emergence of the large hyperscale data center running large language models, how has it changed your business over the last 2 years?
It's changed our business significantly, and it promises to change it even more going forward. So just to give you an order of magnitude, so about 70% of what we provide is dark fiber and lit fiber. That's why we refer to ourselves as a communications infrastructure provider or a digital infrastructure provider. We do a little bit of IP services and managed services, but very distinct from your typical telecom provider, which I didn't answer your question. I spent 15 years at Verizon before coming to Zayo. So in our business, prior to about a year ago, a very large fiber deal was 12 to maybe 24 fibers. From a lit standpoint, it was maybe 1 or 2 terabytes. Today, a large fiber deal is 144 to 432 fibers and growing, and 16 terabits of data on the lit side. So the volume that we're talking about is unlike anything we've ever seen before. And in fact, Chip is aware of this, but I'll just share, last year, in the last 2 quarters of the year, we spent a significant amount of time working with a third-party research firm trying to size up the demand, the supply, the location of AI and what it would look like for our industry. And funny enough, we figured out a lot of what you've already been talking about today, which is, we expect data center capacity demand to grow at a minimum 2 times by 2030, but we actually think our base case is more like 5-6 times. So if we're at 25 gigawatts today, we think it's going to be at 5 to 6 times that in 5 short years, really. And the other thing that's going to happen, again, I know you guys have been talking about this all day, is everyone is going to chase power to be able to provide that capacity. And specifically in the NFL markets, the cost of power, the availability of power won't be sufficient. And so you will see with the cost of power transmission, something like 4 to 10 times the cost of building fiber. Fiber is going to go to power. Power is not going to go to fiber. And so you will see, particularly on the training side of AI, many more communities, non-NFL cities, becoming epicenters on the training side, which is why for the last 5 years we've been building so robustly. We've built 14 new long-haul routes in the last 5 years. We just announced we're going to build 5 more. We're going to overpull another 7. And even then, that's just to keep up with what we think is our share of the market today.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing growth trend. 5 to 6 times what is already an amazing amount of capital infrastructure. And as you build out chasing power, it's more and more, instead of the NFL cities, the urban, suburban areas of our country, It's places like Jackson, Mississippi, or right outside of Jackson, Mississippi, or right outside of Monroe, Louisiana. When you are building long haul to rural and remote areas, you did, and I mentioned this in the last panel, you bid for and competed for and won some of the NTIA middle mile. Does that make a difference? And as we look at the strategic smart allocation in some of our states of BEAD money or excess BEAD money, are those that have already met their last mile deployment objectives, would it be smart for our country to look at the AI connectors and corridors connecting, large regions of our country together, empowering the rural and the remote parts of the country to have new hubs that data centers empower, whether that's manufacturing or research or agriculture? Should we be using BEAD for those connectors and corridors?
Yeah, so there's a lot in your question. The short answer is yes, we should absolutely. And let me peel that back a little bit. So to Chip's question, we've been very fortunate from a government funding standpoint. In the NTIA program, we were awarded 3 different routes. You spoke of the route from Dallas to Atlanta and the demarcs that we were able to put in that allowed for the AWS site in Mississippi. That's going to allow for other sites that otherwise would have been prohibitively expensive for us to do. So in the absence, when you're talking about rural, underserved, or non-served, unserved areas, in the absence of a public-private partnership, it's very hard to make the initial economics work. So it's critical that we continue to fund public-private partnerships to reach the very last miles. And as we do that, and you've been a very vocal advocate for this, I think the focus is generally on the last mile and making sure that everyone is online, which is critically important. But we shouldn't lose sight of the economic development component of that. And I know there's a lot of talk, and I'm sure you'll talk to the chairman about different technologies as it relates to rural America. And listen, our point of view is every technology has a role in solving this issue of unserved and underserved. And there are a lot of great technologies, from LEOs to fixed wireless, when it comes to the last mile, particularly when it's cost prohibitive. And all those providers are our major customers, the carriers, the LEOs. These are all major customers because at the end of the day, it all rides ultimately on fiber from a backhaul standpoint. But if I could make a quick commercial for fiber, what I would say is it's critically important we not underestimate the importance of fiber. And I'll give you 5, 6 reasons real quick. Number 1, scalability and bandwidth, right? AI requires massive amounts of workloads and data that just simply can't be done without fiber. And that's only going to grow. Number 2 is latency. AI applications, AI use cases require sub-millisecond use cases, only can be accomplished with fiber. The third is reliability and consistency, right? So fiber doesn't have some of the challenges that other technologies have from an obstacles or weather or congestion or spectrum congestion. Once you've got the fiber in the ground, it's pretty free to serve. Fourth is the ecosystem that you talk about consistently. It's not just about the fiber, it's about connecting data centers, and it's about connecting the edge and the speeds, the latencies, and the bandwidth required to do that and create that whole ecosystem you can only ultimately do with fiber. And then just real quickly, total cost of serve to total cost of ownership. People don't think about this because fiber is expensive up front. But if you look over the life of fiber, fiber is the cheapest technology because once it's in the ground, the maintenance is relatively minimal, except when it gets cut. And I know we're going to talk about fermenting and other great stuff. And lastly, I would just say, is your point, is ultimately what are we trying to solve? We're trying to solve, from my perspective, is closing the digital divide. But we're also trying to solve economic development in areas that haven't had the underlying technology and infrastructure to be able to do that. And you can only do that with fiber at the end of the day.
Now, going back to your economic development, so that route between Atlanta to Dallas that now has the largest investment in Mississippi history, $20 billion, the AWS data center, Meta, just on the other side of Mississippi into, excuse me, into Louisiana, right outside of Vicksburg between Monroe, another major hyperscale data center, probably equal in size to the AWS investment. None of those would have been possible. None of those would have come without the Zayo route, the dark fiber route enabled, brought. And so that for a relatively small federal investment to help subsidize that route, the economic development along that line and the strategic importance and the hubs and the things that the ecosystem that we're talking about in manufacturing and in agriculture and in so many other complementary ways for economic development that it is a smart way for us to win the AI race against China. And it's a smart way to grow our economy. And it's a smart way to take places like Mississippi or Kansas or South Dakota and change and transform their economies. And so,
Absolutely. I mean, there's very little downside, frankly. I mean, because it enables all the things you've talked about. I'll give you another example. We're building a route with federal funds from Dallas to El Paso. Goes within 20 miles of the Stargate AI data center in West Texas. Those are many examples of just, we wouldn't have built those routes. It wouldn't have been economical, but for a public-private partnership that's going to enable lots of things, including AI and economic development.
And Stargate is how big of an investment?
Apparently half a trillion dollars, right?
It just seems to be a smart way to do things and for us to lead. The other thing we wanted to talk about is permitting and permitting reform and getting, whether it's across the railroad as quickly as possible at an actual cost, or when you have a multi-state fiber route, how do you coordinate between all the agencies in all the states and get all the permits and cross all the rivers as quickly as possible? If you don't mind, just walk us through if we had a major permitting reform that looked at the fiber and the broadband infrastructure of the country. And we've also been talking a good bit about the energy infrastructure that our country needs. And we simultaneously have a race for energy and AI and the critical infrastructure of AI, data centers, energy, fiber. How can we have a comprehensive permitting reform that helps us win the international competition and national security races that the country faces right now?
Yeah, I mean, I know you guys have talked about this at length today, but I would just reinforce it is absolutely critical. It is the biggest contingency. Capital isn't even the biggest contingency anymore. There's so much capital available, public and private, to do this work. Labor force is an issue, but is not the biggest issue. The biggest issue is the speed and the time it takes from a regulatory and from a permitting standpoint. So there's got to be a better way. I know INCOMPAS is doing great work and on a bipartisan basis to try to figure out some solutions. At a minimum, I think we've got to have some form of shot clock. There's got to be a better partnership between the federal government and local and state entities to make this happen. It reminds me a little bit, I started my career at Verizon at a time when the telecoms were trying to get into and provide competition on the video side. And in the early days of doing that, the cable companies very wisely sort of picked off the telecoms in every jurisdiction they tried to go into. So what we had to do is go get state and federal reform to be able to offer that on a widespread. And it strikes me as a similar kind of problem where we got to get all the stakeholders together, local, state, and federal. There's got to be a solution here because, to your point, we're in an arms race with China from an AI standpoint, and the economic development opportunity around the deployment of fiber and AI is too great. I think the stat I saw is by 2030, some $16 trillion is going to be created through value is going to be created through AI. And we want our country to get more than our fair share of that. And we can't be held up by things that are relatively easy to solve if we can get everyone together to work on it.
You know, we've been working with our member companies, with you, companies like Crown Castle on a checklist. So what are the best practices for every community? And as we go into this Congress, we have been having conversations at the highest levels of our congressional leadership on a bipartisan and committee leadership of a broad-based permitting reform so that we can accelerate the build, employ our capital as quickly as possible, and to win the races that matter. And so I'm thankful that you flew in, you gave us time today. I know that you're flying out. It's a great introduction to Chairman Carr and what he's going to be talking about, the AI infrastructure that our national security and our economic competitiveness depends upon. So thank you, Andres, for all your leadership of Zayo and what you mean to the membership here.
Thank you, Chip, and thanks for having us.